All right, well, it's 6 o'clock. Hey, everyone, glad you're here on this Thursday evening. Welcome to our virtual convocation tonight, which is a conversation between Josh Johnson, a 2012 graduate of Centenary and currently a writer for The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and Versha Sharma, a 2008 Centenary graduate and senior correspondent and managing editor at Now This News. Thank you for joining us live tonight, Versha.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Jean Hamming, and it is my pleasure to facilitate this event on behalf of Centenary's Convocation Committee. The event tonight is underwritten by Centenary's Attaway Professorships in Civic Culture. So as we begin, I'd like to explain the format for tonight's event, as well as to share some biographical information about our guests. While I do that, I think everyone should feel free to text any friends who aren't signed on to remind them of all the fun that they're about to miss. You can find the link to this event to register and attend on Centenary's main webpage. So tonight begins with a pre-recorded video in which Versha, expert interviewer, talks with Josh about their careers, the challenges of writing comedy and news in our current political climate, and the secrets to their success, which have a lot to do with Centenary, of course. This video should play for about 45 minutes. After the video, audience members will have an opportunity to ask Versha questions in a live Q&A session, and that will last about 30 minutes. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded and will be posted on the college's YouTube channel for your continued enjoyment. Centenary students seeking passport points, those will be made available. The QR code will be put up at the beginning of the Q&A session. So let me share a little bit about our guests. Josh Johnson is a stand-up comedian, Emmy-nominated and NAACP award-winning writer and performer from Louisiana, living in New York by way of Chicago. Josh graduated from Centenary in 2012 with a degree in theater. He is currently a writer on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and is a former writer and performer on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, where he made his late night debut. As a stand-up, Josh was named Comedy Central's Comic to Watch in 2015, a new face at the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival in 2016, and New York's Funniest in 2018. His story, Catfishing the KKK, has amassed over 8.5 million views on YouTube, and he is one of the most streamed comedians across Comedy Central's digital platforms, with over 31 million views to date. In 2017, Comedy Central released his half-hour special, Comedy Central Stand-Up Presents Josh Johnson, and his album I Like You on Comedy Central Records. In 2018, his quarter-hour special as part of the comedy lineup was released on Netflix. Johnson's other credits include Conan on TBS at midnight, Kevin Hart, New Negroes with Baron Vaughn and Mike Eagle, and This Week at the Comedy Cellar. He spent the last couple of years touring the world with Trevor Noah as part of the Loud and Clear tour, and he tapes his first hour special for Comedy Central in New York later this year. All right. Lots of talent and even more to come. Versha Sharma, a 2008 graduate of Centenary with a degree in political science, and I think minors in history and communication, right? Is a journalist who's been living and working in New York for over 10 years. She currently serves as the senior correspondent managing editor at Now This News, where she's been focused on politics and culture reporting since 2014. She has interviewed everyone from President Obama to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Oprah, Alicia Keys, AOC, Hillary Clinton, and more. Versha has moderated high-profile panels across the US, including members of the Squad like Ilhan Omar and Representative Ayanna Pressley, as well as Stacey Abrams, for events highlighting women of color in politics. She's also filed video dispatches on immigration from the US-Mexico border, reported from mass protests in St. Louis, and traveled to Moscow, Russia for a show she hosted and produced, The Russia Desk. Versha, as part of the Now This Reports team in 2018, won an Edward R. Murrow Award for short documentary about the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. She has made multiple guest appearances on MSNBC, Bloomberg TV, Cheddar TV, and Channel 4 News in the UK. She has been a featured speaker, moderator, and panelist at conferences around the world, including South by Southwest, the annual Online News Association Conference, VidCon, One World Media Awards, and more. She is a regular guest lecturer at NYU and CUNY journalism classes and frequently speaks to other newsrooms. She now serves on the executive board of the Online News Association. Wow, so much talent here tonight. I'm really excited. Those intros took forever because you guys are both so busy doing amazing things. So with that long introduction, we will go ahead and start the video, and then we will be back in about 45 minutes for some live Q&A. So think of your questions as you're watching the video.
Yes, please ask questions.
All right, see you soon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Versha Sharma. I am a senior correspondent and managing editor at Now This News in New York. I'm here with Josh Johnson, another Centenary graduate who works at The Daily Show in New York. We're actually both in Brooklyn right now, recording from there in the middle of a snowstorm. So it's been super interesting to live in New York during this time. But we're here today to talk about our backgrounds at Centenary, how we got from Shreveport to New York, what our jobs have been like, and maybe the craziest year that any of us have seen in our lifetimes. So yeah, Josh, how are you doing?
I'm on fire. Just crushing. Uh,
Survive.
doing as best as can be expected. I mean, the snowstorm is legitimately like, wow.
Yeah,
Go from not seeing any to like a lot.
yeah, it's everything at once. So I graduated in 2008 from Centenary. I majored in political science, did a minor in history and communications, and I did a lot of stuff with the newspaper while I was there, which makes sense because I built a career in journalism. When did you graduate?
I graduated in 2012, and it's weird. I always mess that up. Like I always like give myself extra years than I really had, and I don't. I feel like it's because like right when I graduated, I moved to Chicago, and so half of my 2012 was like graduating from college, and the other half was just like diving in the deep end of living in a new city and being on my own and also like that. So I never let them have the same year. So sometimes people ask me, and I'm like 2014, I don't know, but like it's 2012, and yeah, it's funny because I think I did one thing for the conglomerate when I was at Centenary, and I did not do well though. I don't remember being asked to help ever again. It was so small too that I was like, yeah, this is not it's not my thing.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
so
awesome.
sorry, everyone.
I was editor in chief for like my last year and a half there, and we had a great guy named Nick Rugeley who we would have him do like satirical columns on the back page, like that was our thing. I don't know if they kept comedy sections in the conglomerate, but it was fun to have.
Yeah, I feel like they did for at least a while I was there. I feel like maybe even the first 2 years I was at Centenary, they still had some form of like humor and stuff, and then you could submit um like like little snippets of a story, or people would submit poetry even.
Yeah. What did you study when you were there?
I studied theater for lighting design. So I was, looking at becoming a designer for, concerts and plays, musicals, all that stuff on the lighting side. And yeah, it didn't do any of that. Didn't like did it
That's
for like 6 months out of college, and then I had to make a decision when I was in Chicago if I would keep pursuing it or if I would start doing comedy because they are both like nighttime oriented jobs.
yeah, yeah. Now, so you're a writer for The Daily Show and you also do stand-up comedy. How did you get to where you are?
Um, I it's tough because it's like I don't even know if I can take all of the credit. I'm like people were very nice to me and there were a lot of lucky breaks and then some of it was just accident. I so a good amount of everything that has helped me get to that sort of where I am idea is just trying to be in as many places as you can, and obviously whatever you're doing you want to be very good at it, you want to be like that sort of cream of the crop, but I think you also do yourself a lot of favors by just being present and getting to know as many people as possible, and just almost being an overwhelming force with your presence, like whether it's comedy, or like I'm sure it worked the same way for you with journalism. I imagine writing a lot and writing it well is better than writing a little bit and writing very well. Like, so, a lot of it had to do with that. So when I lived in Chicago, I would try to do every open mic, every show that I could, and I was trying to meet as many comics as I could and everything. And then when I finally made that move to New York, um, I still was I was now struggling with like day job versus, doing stand up at night and having the time and everything. And still making myself available to people, and trying to make as many networking connections as possible, but not just as contacts, like truly trying to make as many friends as I could, which helps when you're very lonely in a new city. But then I actually got a job at the Tonight Show, and the Tonight Show opened a lot of doors in that it was my first comedy job. It was a steady job. It was how I met a full, roster of people that were only professionals at what they did, not like still trying to make it or half moonlighting, half doing something. Like all of these people were like miles and miles ahead of me in both in their joke writing and in their credentials and in industry standards and stuff. And so I learned a lot while I was there. And then when I left Tonight Show, I was just like on the road doing comedy. I had like taped a pilot, which obviously didn't get picked up because you would have referenced it. But then
There's still
uh, yeah, there's still time, and honestly, everyone that was in the pilot is doing much better now. So it's like they may want to do it, who knows? But like, oh man, I really wish it would have got made because like Chris Red was in it, and like Jack Knight was in it, and anyway.
Can I
But
ask what it was about?
it was a travel show, and it was gonna be about the three of us just like young young broke black men trying to travel the world, so that it was going to be like the cheapest ways to travel to each place. And it
Yes,
was I was hopefully it can still happen, fingers crossed.
post-vaccine for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Gotcha. How did you get that first job at the Tonight Show? Was that a writing job?
that was a writing job, yeah. So then basically what happened was I had applied to the Tonight Show to do a stand-up set. Like, so I had sent them a tape for them to watch to show Jimmy to see if he would want to have me on. And they watched the tape, and I guess they enjoyed the tape enough where they were like, would he want to send in some jokes, like as a writer? And so that got back to me, and so I did. So I sent in a bunch of jokes, and didn't hear back for a little while, so I assumed I didn't get it. And then they put in another request for me to send some more jokes, so then I sent another packet of jokes and everything. And then after that, I got an interview, and then I found out that I got the job. So it was my first writing job, and that's honestly, I think, what prepared me to be at Daily Show now, is that in the interim between being at Tonight Show and Daily Show, I was just like working, grinding, and everything like that. And then I had actually applied to be a correspondent on the opposition with Jordan Klepper, which is now it's not happening anymore. But that was how I met some Daily Show producers, and so then they want me to do a Daily Show packet, and I did, and then once again like got the interview with Trevor and everything, and then got hired. So it's also a lesson for me. That was a huge lesson in how good it can be to not get what you want sometimes, because sure, if I had got that job, I would have been on TV for a season. But now here I am, like 3 years into writing at the show and making all these friends and really enjoying the experience and stuff. So, I think that sometimes it's very important to not be too rigid about your goals and about what you want, because sometimes you don't even know what's best for you in that. With hindsight, obviously things turned out better for me this way than what I wanted.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that. Now tell me when you started at The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and then I want to talk about just what it was like to work there in the writers' room for 2020, which again was, one of the most tumultuous years for so many reasons.
Yeah, I mean, so basically it was October 2nd of 2017 was like my first day. And it was really cool because it I wasn't so out of my element because obviously I'm in a new job, so I'm nervous. But because I had been at the Tonight Show already, I had a general idea of what things would be like, even though the two shows work very different from each other. I still, it's like with anything. It's like you've written for a place. Maybe you wrote for one newspaper and now you go to another newspaper. So even though things are going to be different, you still have a general sense. And so everyone was very welcoming very quickly, and I found that like there's such a community around the jokes and around how everything is prepared that it was very easy for me to catch on. Things weren't very singular. They weren't like you go do this, go to your office, and then bring it back to me when you're done. It was more like, all right, let's all sit down and talk about the story, and then talk about what people might think when they first hear it, and then talk about what jokes there are to be made inside of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I would just love to hear everything about like how that process works. Like, can you kind of run us quickly through like what is a typical day for producing a show?
I mean, it's very it's very different. So the March and earlier, like January, February, March of 2020, and a day in the writer's room, everything like that is completely opposite to what it is, now on the other side of having the whole pandemic and not having to work remote and not being able to all be together and everything. So there are a lot of things that honestly I'm not even privy to in the remote situation because I'm submitting all of my stuff, and then, I'll have Zoom calls with other writers, stuff like that, but it won't be the same as when we are in the office, because when we were in the office it was like this wonderful like morning meeting that we would have that was like all the writers, the producers, Trevor, the EPs, like all of us would gather in the one room, which would be incredibly dangerous now. And so it's a complete different spin. But we would start out the day like that, and we would watch a bunch of news packets of stories, and then talk about what might be the most important for today, or talk about what maybe doesn't have that tier of importance and could be saved for tomorrow, or what might not even be a real story. And then people get to throw out jokes or talk about how the thing not just makes them feel, but like it's very important to have the full perception of what people are going to think about a story when they first hear it, and it because it informs how you tell it. I mean, I'm sure you know this better than anyone through your work in journalism, is that if you say a thing a certain way, you're leaning people, whereas if you just say it straight, you let them form their own opinion. Now, we're not the news, so we're just making jokes, but even in doing that, we're trying to do it in a way that brings a sort of like level playing field to, pitch the joke to the audience. And we're very lucky, very blessed to have so many people with like an international perspective and voice. Like we have, people from all different countries that are in that big room, giving their insight on like, well, just so you know the history behind this thing. And that's another great thing I love about working there, is that like it's not, a lot of places will tell you to speak up but then not support you when you speak up, and that's not been my experience at all. It's been like, we want you to speak up so we can support what you're saying and learn from you. And that's been one of the main things that I think has made the Daily Show so easy for me to like dive into, because it was like from day one it's like, well, what do you think about this? And it's being asked sincerely, and it's being um it's being carried over to like, it's not just that you say something and then people, pretend that they hear you. Like I've heard of that in other work environments. It's a legitimate like, oh, I didn't know that. That's great for the story. Let's use that. And now you've helped build up this whole act in a way that wouldn't have been otherwise had you not said something.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always heard and read that TV writers' rooms are very collaborative. It's a very collaborative process. So it sounds like that is exactly true for The Daily Show, both pre and post pandemic. And I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
up kind of like, younger people and getting news to young people. I know you say that you're not the news, you're making jokes about it, but I know, I grew up on the Daily Show in the Jon Stewart era, and he was inspiring and hilarious. And I remember at that time there was like a good chunk of young Americans who did actually say they got their news from the Daily Show and sources like that. And the thing that I think is similar between us, which is great, is that now our whole mission is news for young people by young people. And, it's by far the youngest and most diverse newsroom I've worked in, both in terms of, age, experience, race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, even race and ethnicity, or sorry, nationality, as you also mentioned for the Daily Show. So I think one reason why we've been so successful at Now This is because there was a void. There wasn't really a news organization that was dedicated to making news accessible for young people. I started at Now This in 2014, so I've been there for almost 7 years now, and we really started at the beginning of like when social video started being a thing. So videos in your Facebook feed and your Instagram feed, that all started in 2014. So we got in on that trend early. We were able to build on that trend early, and we've expanded so much since then. We reach, I think, 72 million people, or we have 72 million followers, and we reach over 60% of Americans under the age of 35, which we're very proud about because I think we've achieved our mission of news for young people. But we also don't tell it in the traditional way, which I love about, I think, both of our jobs, because what we discovered and learned is that young people, there's this misconception that young people don't care about hard news, breaking news, politics, world issues. But what we found is if you deliver it to them in an accessible, even fun, informative way, they're going to consume it. And if you deliver it to them on the platforms that they're already on, so all of these social media apps, then they'll deliver it too, right? They're not necessarily going to nytimes.com or cnn.com to find out what the news of the day is. So how do you feel like your time on the Daily Show so far has kind of like changed, if it's changed from where we were in the Trump administration and now, right, we're preparing with this new administration? What is that change going to be like for you guys?
I mean, when I think about it, I do think about the fact that it's going to be a lot more. There's going to be a bigger range in stories because I think that so much of what we got used to was this sort of like Trump 12-hour news cycle where it's like before you can even cover a thing, another thing is happening, whether it's all him or it's just people in his cabinet. And I think that that level of chaos is like there's a huge misconception that that's good for entertainment, but it's just not because you have a situation where you don't even get to let something marinate or come up with more than one joke about it because as soon as you've talked about it, another thing has happened. So now there are all these things that are very interesting takes or funny jokes that are just sort of floating in the ether because they never really got to be absorbed because so much chaos was going on. And so I think that looking for the new administration to have a little bit more of that boring and stable approach, because then I think when funny or silly or ridiculous things do happen, they're now heightened. And it's like you can only talk about Trump so much before you're joking the joke, and it that is like that's a thing that's fun for a day. It's like to me, it's a lot like when you watch something like SNL and a sketch is so funny that the actors break a little bit. It's
Yeah,
like if that happens once in a while, it's the funniest thing.
yeah,
But if it happens the whole sketch, now you don't even really know what the sketch is about. You're like, this is a little, I'm glad you guys are having a good time, but this is a little odd. And so that's kind of what it has felt like writing political satire, parody, comedy during Trump is that, yeah, there are these moments that really stick out because they're so funny or someone has a great, spin on something that happened. But like after a while, it's just too much chaos. And so I think that with the Biden Harris administration, there's at least some sort of ode to returning to normalcy in a way that might actually heighten political satire again, because now when something happens and there's actual subtlety to it, you can dive in a way that's like it's so different than a thing of like this is blatantly weird and evil. Like this is they're weirdly on the side of asbestos for some reason. It's like that thing is only funny for like a day before you're like, why? What else is happening?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's my main hope is that there's enough stability that we can start creating the comedy again, as opposed to just making all of comedy comment on what's happening presently.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, I'm sure it was challenging because so much about the Trump administration seemed very unbelievable. So it's like, how do you even do political satire when you can't make up some of these stories? Like, you can't make up something that's more ridiculous than Trump looking directly into a solar eclipse or throwing paper towels to Puerto Ricans when he goes to visit. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was one, I can't remember what the story was. I'm trying to remember now. There was one where it was like literally our joke and then it happened. And it was so disappointing because we had to rewrite. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was something like very like docile and silly. But it was like it was I think maybe it was when he I think maybe it was when he fired Steve Bannon, and then his tweets after firing Steve were kind of like roasting Steve, and we had already done something that was along the lines of like, what if Trump roasted him on do, and then it happened, and we were like, oh, okay.
yeah. I think one of the also interesting things post Jon Stewart is that Trevor obviously brings his international perspective to American politics, and being from South Africa and also growing up in an apartheid state and seeing what a really racist society looks like. And of course, we're grappling with that right now too. We're grappling with our own history. I think one of my favorite segments was when he compared Trump to African dictators. Like that felt like one of the most memorable segments because of course he could speak to that with more authority than other comedians could. And he made a pretty compelling case about it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that there's definitely something to be said for what the internet has done in how it can connect people from everywhere. That now I think most people, depending on what they're trying to create, whether they know it or not, they have an international wing to what they're saying. So I guess this is just as an example, it's like there are even basketball documentaries that are, or no basketball podcasts that have no real gear or like special attention being paid to other countries. They're just talking about basketball in the US. But because people from other countries love basketball in the US, they look at their analytics later, and this podcast has like thousands and thousands of fans from Slovenia and thousands of friends from Poland and stuff like that. And so I think that taking on the assumption that all of media has a potential chance to be international, and then adding that perspective, because sometimes you don't even have to change what you're saying. I think that most people have a general, at least in general, have a similar understanding if they're coming from, a sort of capitalistic democratic society. They're going to have a clue into what you're saying. And so I think that he's done an amazing job with bringing that perspective in a way that is super accessible to Americans. Because I think that there are other publications that I've read, and media that I've watched or listened to, that in their pursuit to be international, they almost alienate their core audience because they're trying to make it so open that now everyone kind of understands what they're saying, but no one is fully engaged. And so it's something that, I'm happy and proud to be helping out with.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think 2016 taught us in media and journalists, and I'm sure in comedy as well, to not make any predictions, right? You can't take anything for granted in terms of what might happen. I think a lot of Americans were also bracing themselves for that to potentially happen again in 2020. Um, we had a year where the person who won the popular vote also won the electoral college. So it's nice to see that match up democratically. But what was it like covering the election for you?
I mean, I think there was a little bit of anxiety towards making any sort of predictions in my own mind or letting that sort of skew how I would write things because I think that we're finding out now that even with even with a lot of pollsters being correct, the details of their correct prediction are very wrong. So I think that in a weird way, we somehow, I say we, but like in a weird way, pollsters have learned how to be more wrong 4 years later, which is very stressful. It's just distressing because it's like, all right, then I don't think I should listen to you, but I'm
Yeah.
also not gonna not listen. So it creates this weird paradox in your mind because you want your sources to be reliable, but they can't tell you the future. But like telling you the future is almost kind of what they're promising. So I think that for me, it informed all of my writing to have lots of options and alternatives, so that a joke could go any which way, and that even though it's very hard to write a joke that applies to both Biden and Trump, that you can still write a joke that applies to both the anxiety that Democrats would feel if Trump got reelected to the anxiety that Republicans feel that now that Trump hasn't been. So I think that there are a lot of similarities even in the different political sides of the spectrum that inform certain jokes where it works no matter who you're talking about.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in journalism is dealing with this incredible divide that we have in America. So I'm glad that you kind of mentioned appealing to both sides or making jokes that are relevant to both sides, because there's a huge divide, right? We're an incredibly polarized country. If you look at it historically, objectively, politically, we've never been this polarized before. And it's even gotten to the point where one party wouldn't even accept the results of a legitimate election following Trump's lead. And of course, Biden forged ahead, started building his administration, making history with the first South Asian and woman and Black vice president and Kamala Harris, which is very exciting. Um, so, do you guys talk about that, like in the writers' room? Like, do you talk about like how can we attract more conservative viewers, or is that like not a you know issue or concern?
I mean, I'm really there to just write the best jokes, and I feel like people who appreciate jokes and appreciate a an appeal to humor are going to be attracted to the show, and there's no real way to start just shooting for certain demographics. And I also don't think that I don't even know if I would know how to do that sort of appealing thing because I can just even speaking to just doing stand up. There's a thing where as an artist, as you get bigger, no matter what you do, whether it's stand up, music, anything, you now have enough of a pool of fan base to look at your overall demographics of who's watching you. And I think that I think it is sometimes a mistake to look at who's already watching and then see the smaller slivers and be like, well, we got to make this sliver bigger. Because it's like if you being your most authentic self gathers this ratio of a pie of your fans, then I think that you can only be true to yourself and you can only keep doing the things that feel right to you. And so I think that people who are of a different political opinion than me that appreciate jokes still appreciate my jokes. And so I've never felt the need or been led to by anyone else try to get someone, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk a little bit about kind of just our journeys from Shreveport to New York. We recapped that a little bit earlier, but more specifically, after I graduated centenary in 2008, I actually went straight to work on the Obama campaign, right? So that was his first election, the historic election, and I worked on it in Shreveport, which was a very interesting experience, as you can imagine. Louisiana, being a historically red state, but Caddo Parish is super interesting because it's more split. So in 2008, we actually flipped it from red to blue. Caddo Parish voted for Obama. I think was one of 10 out of 64 Louisiana parishes that went to Obama that year.
Wow.
But it's, yeah, and it was a small margin, right? It was like 52% or 51%. But it was still a majority. And so it stayed blue since then, 2012, 2016, and now 2020, which is interesting. And that, I mean, that was just an interesting experience for me in general, but it was also kind of a nice bookend for me because after I got to Now This and became senior correspondent, started doing a lot of high profile interviews. Actually got to interview Joe Biden when he was vice president about gun violence. And once we built up this huge young audience that we had, we actually got an interview with President Obama. So I did a sit down with him. I told him about Caddo Parish and Shreveport, which was interesting. And it was a great conversation that we had a couple of weeks before the end of his second term, which was very interesting. But I think what we also try to do at Now This, to what we were kind of just speaking about, is hold everybody accountable, right? It doesn't matter if they agree with our political opinions or not. If we have a politician or somebody in front of us who has power, we want to make sure we're holding them accountable. And so in that interview and other interviews, we did press Obama on what was going on with the Dakota Access Pipeline at the time. We pressed him on what was going on with James Comey, which, God, the FBI director drama seems like years ago, but this was a man who was fired by Trump early in his administration, so it still became relevant. But my journey was this combination of campaign work and deciding after about 6 to 9 months of working on various political campaigns. I went to Georgia actually to work on a Senate runoff race, and we're seeing the same thing happen again 12 years later with the recent runoff races there. I decided that I wanted to switch from campaign work to journalism. Campaign work is crazy and exhausting and doesn't pay very well. It's just not very healthy for people. Some people are built for it, some people aren't. But I did really want to work on holding people accountable, even people who might be in a party that I agree with more. So I switched to journalism. I did a whole unpaid internship in New York at Talking Points Memo, which is a U.S. politics focused digital site. I managed to get a job there. I stayed there for 3 years. I kind of learned everything about the digital publishing business and reporting. Then I went to MSNBC in 2012, where I covered the presidential election there. Again, Mitt Romney seems like such a boring person or Republican compared to what we saw the last 4 years, but it was interesting at the time. And then I worked at a couple other digital news startups, all based here in New York, before I got to Now This. And again, I've been here since 2014. I love my job. I love my coworkers. I love what we do. So, what was your journey from Shreveport to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, it all feels fairly quick, even though it has taken a lot of time. But yeah, I moved from Shreveport to Chicago, the fall of 2012, and that's when I started doing stand up. And for a little while, for maybe a good year, not much really did happen. I was going up at as many open mics as I could, and then I started getting asked to do shows, and now I'm starting to book more shows. But it took me getting a different job for me to fully open up my schedule at night. And then from there, things really started taking off. Like I got past a couple clubs, so then I would have club spots, and I would have bar shows, all these different types of shows. And then a couple people asked me to open for them, and that was all while I was still working during the day. So I was sleeping at a lot of odd places, falling asleep on the tray, whatever. But it wasn't until I got a manager that I had some sense of direction. And he was adamant about me moving to New York or LA. He was adamant about me trying to do acting and all these other things. And so, towards the end of me being in Chicago, when I was planning to move to New York, that's when I started getting really serious about the fact that this could be a job, like this could be an actual. Because even when I started doing it, I just enjoyed it. I don't know if I really had a plan because once I sort of abandoned the thing that I graduated in. I was a little bit like, well, I like working at this grocery store and I like doing stand up at night, so I guess I'll just do that from now on maybe. And then when things started to take a turn and there were real career moves to be made, that's when I sort of opened my eyes to the fact that it's like, oh no, if I do this right, I can do it well. And so then when I moved to New York, I was still, working at a grocery store, going up at night and stuff like that. But even before the Tonight Show, I booked a college tour that, it was one of those points that, even as subtle as it was a bit life changing, because I managed to book enough schools that even after taxes and after all this other stuff, I was able to pay off my student loans. And so then even though I no money, I also didn't have any debt. And that was a very different place to be in, because I think that it changed my mindset towards what I could do financially, like whether I wanted to try to buy property or whatever that thing was. And then getting the job at the Tonight Show changed my career perspective again, because it taught me to not be as delicate with my jokes, because a lot of jokes get thrown out that no matter how much of a fan someone is of a show, there's so many jokes you're never going to hear. Just either cut for time, or like, maybe the host isn't feeling it as much, doesn't know if they like where that joke leads the rest of the show, or whatever. And so then in between uh, Tonight Show and Daily Show, I had a stint of like just touring, just trying to do a little bit of acting here and there. And then once at Daily Show, it's still been, I've been very blessed that it's still been upwards trajectory. Like I was able to do my Comedy Central half hour, do my Netflix 15 as like part of the comedy lineup. And then this year has been a bit challenging, just because my hour special was supposed to be taped this year and it's been postponed twice. So, I think that um, 2020 definitely presented a bunch of challenges. But now with 2021, I'm looking forward to being able to tape the special and release it, and then being able to release this mixtape of jokes and everything that I've been working on. So those are pretty much all of the like big bullet points that were big changing moments. And then throughout that, it's just been like falling in love over and over again with comedy and what it does for people and what it allows me to do. Like I've been able to meet so many people and travel to other countries and stuff just to do it. So I think that it's been, I definitely feel like I made the right choice looking back, because I'm not gonna lie, I was not the best lighting designer. So if I had stuck with it, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think your story is great because it kind of highlights like the importance of being flexible and staying flexible as you're following your passions and building a career. Your career doesn't have to be exactly what you studied in college. It can be something completely different. Although I think you're like in the ballpark with theater and that background. Like that's still relevant. Um,
Sure, I know when a light is off now when I'm at the theater, and I'm like, I think I see the problem.
Yeah, it's good trivia. And you mentioned like sleeping on trains, I think, and in weird places, and that just reminded me that when I first came to New York again, like with that unpaid internship, I was sleeping on my friend's couch for 3 weeks, and very grateful to my friends who put me up for those first couple of months when I really wasn't earning much. I wasn't earning anything for 3 months, and kind of relying on savings and other odd jobs to get through that period. Not that I would necessarily recommend that, but I want people to know that that is a reality for creative industries, especially I think when you're trying to get your foot in the door, is you're probably going to struggle at some point.
Yeah, and you also have to be you have to bring to every like creative endeavor a sort of like three-pronged approach. Like no one is going to recognize how good you are unless you tell them in a weird way. I mean, I look at, I look at a lot of like hip hop in that way, where it's like all of them think they're the best rapper ever. That's crazy. But then because they say it so much, all their fans think they're the best rapper. So I think that the three-pronged approach is basically being good at what you do, telling people about what you do and having a sort of like business plan for what you're going to do. And I think that if you attack it in that way, the days of having to sleep on couches or like, piece things together with sublets is going to be, either few and far between or a very short amount of time at the beginning. Because I think that so often people hope that how good they are gets recognized enough that it takes care of the other things, and that's rarely the case. Like, I'm sure you've seen it a lot in journalism, especially where someone carries enough name recognition that it's actually okay that they're only sort of mediocre. And I think that someone up and coming then has to be, they do have to toot their horn a little bit, or they have to be mindful of exactly what you just said. The fact that it's like, all right, the trajectory I'm on now, I'm not going to make money for a little while. So what's my other plan, or what am I going to be doing during that time?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of my experience at Centenary, studying political science obviously set me up well for a career in political journalism and having campaign experience in the interim. But honestly, the most important formative part, I think, of my college experience was working on the conglomerate because, being a reporter, then being an editor, then being editor in chief, and learning how to manage a whole staff of people and produce a newspaper. I mean, so many sleepless nights in the sub, so many overnights, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I did have Thursday 8 a.m. history classes one semester, and I was just constantly falling asleep in those classes because I'd stayed awake
Yeah,
the night before putting together the paper. But
yeah.
I mean, it worked out. I think it worked out. So, are there any other parts of your centenary experience that you kind of think about favorably?
I am not gonna lie. I had a similar situation where I think that even though it wasn't necessarily all because of the production or anything like that, I had a geology class that like it was some of the best sleep I ever got. And honestly, it was, I don't know. Obviously, I should have been falling asleep in class, but like even looking back now as an adult, I don't know when I would have pieced the rest of the time together because I was trying so hard to learn as much as I could about lighting and every aspect of it because in my mind it was like, did I want to be a designer? Did I want to be a master electrician? Or did I want to just get on a tour and be, one of the electricians on a tour? And all of those things took, trying to be as much of a part of every production as I could until I really knew what I was doing. And everything else, for a little while at least, seemed to be getting in the way of that, even though I'm there for all of it. And so, that experience of learning all the things that go into the sort of business side of creative art were even some of the things that informed my decisions when I moved to Chicago, because it was like, all right, I know I'm not making any money doing comedy, but I'm also not making much money doing, electrics, or trying to get on a tour doesn't seem to really be feasible right now. So, what am I going to do? And I don't even know if I would have been thinking that way had I not delved into the deep end of what's the most like financially reliable way to do this art.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you, well, let me just start here. What are you looking forward to in 2021 the most?
Um, it's a three-way tie. So for me, being able to travel and do shows again, um, being able to release this comedy special because I've been working on it for a while and everything, and then being able to release the mixtape because I think that in each way, all three of those things I've given a different part of myself to, and so it's just going to be nice to share that with people. Obviously you always hope things are well received, but also when they're not, it's good feedback too. So I'm excited for whatever the response is coming out of those three things. Like I have a lot of jokes that I've been writing in quarantine, and like I got to showcase some of them in the recent. I don't know if you would have seen it, but it was like a recent Comedy Central clip that came out. That's just on YouTube, and that was nice because when you look at the entirety of the year, I only got to do one thing, and it was that thing, and people seem to be vibing with it. So that's amazing. So I'm just hoping for more of that in 2021.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's exciting. I can't wait to see your hour-long special. I mean, that's a huge achievement.
Yeah, no, I feel it still feels very weird. It's like I think that because it's had to be postponed for the pandemic and everything, and obviously I want everyone being safe and everything, so I had no objections to it being postponed. But after a while of postponing, it does start to feel like you're preparing for a thing that'll happen eventually, I guess maybe. So it'll be dope to actually have it come out.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned something that just reminded me of kind of like I think what I want to close on again are these personal experiences that we've had. Um, I still feel like imposter syndrome sometimes when I'm at work or doing these major interviews and I get nervous before, or I'm even like at networking events now, of course, digital or virtual events, and talking to some of these other high profile people. I think being a woman of color, especially, makes that even harder. I think everybody feels some degree of imposter syndrome. It's worse. It's often worse for women. It's often worse for women of color. I have built up a confidence in my education and experience that I think has allowed me to work through all of that. I still have my days, I still have my moments. There are still a lot of challenges of being even in a high up position in the media industry right now. We've had a lot of changes, but it's still an industry that's dominated by white men, especially at the leadership and executive level. It can still be hard for other voices to break through. So another thing that I kind of prioritize is holding the door open for other people, for other women of color who are trying to come up, especially from Louisiana. I didn't even mention that we're both from Louisiana. We didn't just go to
Yeah,
college
yeah.
there. I think we both grew up in Alexandria, which is,
Yeah, yeah.
love Sunlaw, Central Louisiana. We're doing it. So what have your experiences been, if anything, that you can speak to about, being a Black man specifically in the entertainment industry?
I mean, I would agree with you that I think I see more struggles for women than I have seen for myself. Think that I've I don't think that I have been able to pinpoint several instances of being, slighted or taken less seriously or not being given opportunities because I was a black man. Even though I'm not going to contest that maybe they happened, but I also think that ideally they were at an early enough period where I could just shirk it off and be like, maybe I'm not that good. I don't know. But I do feel a certain responsibility both for the people who have done so much for me because like even Trevor has been great and like he allowed me to open up for him in 2019 and that was a big uh, jump start in my career and everything and then being able to learn from him working at the show that it does make me feel inclined like all right someone's going to put me on I have to both take that opportunity seriously so that I can then build up my own profile or whatever you want to call it and then I'll be able to put people on who I think are very funny or very talented or just aren't getting the sort of crack that they need at things and so that I think that's been my main thing is that not so much like a story of struggle where I've been particularly held down. I think it's more, I feel a responsibility to the people that are in my same situation that I should be better and I should do more so that I can, have more to give and be able to inform people how to do better for themselves. So, I especially in comedy, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a woman doing comedy, because you're in a very tight pocket where the audience wants you to prove that you're like a chill, cool, lady and you're funny and everything. But then there's certain subject matter that they, for whatever reason, don't want to hear from you. But then it's the same stuff you need to do to prove you're cool and laid back and everything. So, that's a needle to thread that I'm very you know, fortunate that that's not my cross to bear. But for the people who are doing it in a very particular and special way, I want to be able to uplift them. So that's sort of my, I guess, like journey, being like a black man doing comedy in America. And you know, I think that that's going to present challenges of its own, because then at a certain point you have to be so powerful, or your name has to carry so much weight that it does sort of supersede like an industry standard or a precedent. Like, you know, I look at what Chris Rock and others did for Leslie Jones, and it's like, all right, but to do that, you have to be Chris Rock. Like, you know, it didn't really matter who other people and what other people said how great she was, because people have known she was great for
Yeah,
years. But it took like a Chris Rock name recognition thing to be like, you need to seriously look at this person,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
that's true. Where can people follow your work? Where do you want them to go see you?
So if you are looking for me on the socials, you can find me at Josh Johnson Comedy on Instagram, at Josh Johnson Comedy on YouTube, and on Twitter at Josh Johnson, and Facebook at Josh J Comedy. If you still use Facebook, it's totally okay if you don't. I understand that for a lot of people, you don't even know what it is, and that's fine. You've moved on, you've
Yeah.
evolved. But I also, if you just, hopefully, the plan with my sincere wish is that if you just type in Josh Johnson stand up or Josh Johnson anything into YouTube, some of my stand up will come up, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. It has, because I've searched for you and it came up and it was great and
Oh,
very
thank
similar.
goodness.
Yeah, yes. Very similarly, I'm at Versharma on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on all of the platforms. I'm looking forward to an interesting year for journalism as we kind of shift away from what the last 4 years have been like, and deal with completely new challenges. I mean, some of the same old challenges will be there, misinformation, disinformation, truth and accuracy in reporting. These are all things that we're always concerned with, but especially given kind of the recent events that we've seen. But Josh, it has been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Any final words or thoughts you want to give people as we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously 2020 has been an incredibly challenging and scary year, but I think that it's definitely opened up uh, some of the holes in the logic of how we do things. So I think if there's anything you've ever wanted to do, no matter what it is or how silly or scary or unlikely it seems, I think that you really just go ahead and give it a shot, because I mean, if anything, 2020 proved that you can do all the right things and you can still get thrashed around by the world. So, you know, you might as well be doing the things that you want to be doing.
I second that. I think a combination of hard work, passion, and luck got us both to where we are now. And honestly, the Centenary Network is incredible. And whoever's watching this, you have Josh and me. Reach out to us on social media. We're available. We're around. And Josh, hopefully, again, we get vaccinated soon and we can actually get a drink together in Brooklyn one day. We'll see.
Yeah, that'd be dope. It'd be crazy if we live even closer together than we like initially thought. Because Brooklyn's a big place, but I feel like we're probably only like 4 blocks away.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah. It's close. One day we'll get to some semblance of normalcy. But I want to thank Dr. Jean Hamming and Kate in the Public Affairs Office for giving us this opportunity. You guys are awesome. I had Dr. Hamming as a sci-fi English teacher, and that was one of the best classes I ever took. So thank you to Centenary, thank you to everybody watching, and thank you, Josh.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back, Versha.
Had to get the shout out to your sci-fi class and at the end there.
I
Still
noticed that. I was very, very grateful. I'm teaching science fiction right now, and I noticed that a couple of my students are in attendance. So
Oh, that's great.
I'll have to remind them of how great I am tomorrow in class. I don't know if you've been following the chat, but there's just a wonderful showing of love and support for you and Josh and Alexandria and Centenary VSAR. Hi. And so I think that's really fantastic. Are you ready to get into some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, folks. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A slot there, and we'll get to those. We've already got one question from Thomas Scarlato. He asks, was the conglomerate your first foray into journalism?
It actually wasn't. So as you heard Josh and I talk about, we're both from Alexandria. The Alexandria Daily Town Talk, what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, actually had something called the Youth Council, which was an amazing opportunity for young local students to get involved in journalism. They actually published our work in the newspaper, which was incredibly exciting for high schoolers. So that was my first foray into journalism, really, although predating that, I was always interested in writing, entering writing contests, working with students to create our own little magazines at our 6th grade center. I remember doing that. But the conglomerate absolutely was such a pivotal experience for me at Centenary and in building my career. And it's, a lot of my favorite memories from Centenary come from working on the conglomerate.
Do you have particular stories that you remember writing?
Oh gosh, I wrote so many. I wrote so much. I think one of the big ones was when President George W. Bush visited campus. Do you remember that? Were you there?
I do remember that.
Yeah, so that was a major one, obviously a major visit, and then also a major story because there was a lot of anti-war advocacy happening at the time. Some professors and students organized a protest against his visit on campus. So that was very interesting to cover, was that, the countercultural, counterpolitical movement to that. That was one of my favorite, I think, like college reporting events. And then other stories, I'm like thinking about construction at McGill, like not particularly scintillating, but some of these things needed to be reported on, so.
Yeah, that Bush visit and subsequent protests, that was pretty high drama stuff.
It was, yes.
To cover as a college student, that's pretty amazing. Okay, we've got a question in the chat. It's a two-parter from Casey. Besides working at the conglomerate, what were some of the best lessons that you learned at Centenary that have helped your journalism career? And then I'll get to the second one in a second.
I see. What were some of the best lessons I learned at Centenary? Well, okay, so I talked again about my political science major being huge for informing both my interest and my career. And my capstone project that I worked on Dr. Grunez with in senior seminar was studying Obama and Hillary Clinton's primary campaign in 2008. So I graduated summer 2008. So it was right when Obama was clinching the nomination, but we had been through this whole Democratic presidential primary, and compared to what we've seen in recent years, I think a lot of people forget this, but it got quite nasty at a lot of times between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So I studied, their social media, what news coverage was like of them, and that has been absolutely fascinating to look at where we were in 2008 with the news coverage of presidential campaigns, where we were in 2016 and 2020, and really seeing up close in 2016 how unfairly Clinton was treated by a lot of media because she is a woman, and still seeing, even in this day and age, how gendered coverage is and how gendered editorial decisions are at a lot of major outlets, was both depressing but interesting to see, and I think, important to observe and follow.
Yeah, well, and it seemed like so much of coverage about her was reflected through her husband or about her husband, which was sort of unfair, right?
Yes.
We have another question. Let's see here. Versha, as a journalist, and Josh as a comedian. Josh isn't here, so Versha will have to answer for him. How difficult is it trying to determine what information you bring to the masses? Is it difficult to be neutral? Are you able to ignore that neutrality? How do you avoid upsetting people receiving that information? That's a really good question.
That is a great question. It is one that we grapple with every single day. And I think journalists across the board in the US have had to recommit to accuracy and truth in the last couple of years. And the Trump administration presented a huge challenge for a lot of journalists and news organizations that not everybody was able to meet, because we simply had never had a president of the United States who lied or told misleading claims with as much frequency as he did. I think the Washington Post final fact checker tally was that he did over 30,000 false claims or lies while he was in office. We've never seen numbers like that before in American history. So that was a huge challenge. And unfortunately, we are often accused of having bias simply by reporting the truth, because the truth became so politicized in the hands of Trump and some Republican leaders. The pandemic also became a huge part of that story. I mean, the idea that mask wearing has become a political issue or a political debate, I think was shocking to a lot of science and health journalists over the last year. So there have been like all of these issues that we never necessarily expected to be divisive or interpreted as political, but that's where we have to recommit ourselves to emphasizing that our job as journalists is to report the truth, to tell the truth as accurately as possible, to worry less about how it's going to be received, because I can't control how that's going to be received. But if I am staying true to my mission of telling the truth, then I'm doing my job as a journalist.
So what about consumers of the news? What is their responsibility, or what's some advice you can offer them?
So always diversify your sources. That's a major one. Make sure that you know who your sources are, first of all. I think social media has been interesting because it's benefited now this, and it's benefited my career, absolutely. But it's also caused huge problems in a lot of ways for news consumption. The fragmentation of media and journalism that we've seen because of social media is one reason why we've seen a rise in conspiracy theories, and we've seen a rise in misinformation, disinformation. So my advice to people is to be careful about what you're consuming, to check your sources, to make sure it's not linking back to a fake news site or coming from a fake Facebook group, and not actual journalists or reporters, because there are a lot of people out there who are doing their job and who are telling the truth. So I think vetting your sources and emphasizing media literacy in your circles as well is really important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that colleges have a real responsibility to do, and can do more of.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
All right, let's see. We have a question from Candace. What was it like to interview Obama, the Bidens, and AOC? And then her follow-up question is, what does a typical day look like for you?
So interviewing all of those people was an incredible experience, because being able to have that sort of access and be close to the kind of power that these people wield and then question them about it, I think is incredibly important and another key role of journalists. Obama was super interesting. I'll tell like a personal story about that experience. We were only promised like 15 minutes max with him. If you know Obama, he is a very thoughtful speaker. He can take a very long time to say things and to answer questions. And so when 10 minutes had gone by in this interview and I was like, I'm still just on the second question, what are we going to do? But to his credit and to his team's credit, we were able to actually stretch that into a 23-minute interview, which I was very proud about, because that never happens, especially with sitting presidents. But he was engaged and he was interested and he wanted to talk. And he knew that he was talking to young people specifically when he was talking to Now This. So that was really interesting as well. The Bidens was a great experience. I went to St. Louis a couple years ago where they were working on a Wounded Warrior project. And that was interesting because I got to interview both of them at the same time, Joe Biden and Dr. Jill Biden. We talked about veterans issues. We talked about what was going on with Trump at the time. You know, Trump versus the military has been a recurring storyline, which Biden, you know, given his own family's service in the military, feels very strongly about. So that was interesting. And then AOC, I've met her in person a couple of times. We actually covered her early in her first campaign. So when nobody was really taking her seriously and when nobody knew who she was, that's one of the things that we do well, is identifying young people who are pushing for change. That was one reason why we invited her to the studio and got to do that interview when a lot of other people did not know who she was. And then I was able to interview her again last summer during the pandemic. So that was an Instagram live interview. It was done virtually. And that was fantastic. I mean, if you're not following AOC on Instagram, I think you're missing out on a lot of really interesting content. And if you are, you may have seen that she did a 90-minute live by herself earlier this week talking about her experiences during the US Capitol riot. That is just, I think, kind of essential viewing for this moment in time and understanding what it was like for a young woman of color in Congress to be hiding from these insurrectionists and really fearing for her life.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's really some intense footage.
Yeah.
What's a typical day look like for you?
Oh, a typical day, yes. So that changes every single day. It really depends on the news cycle. We're starting to see some stability come into the news cycle with the Biden administration. It's certainly not the same as it was under Trump, as Josh and I were talking about. But typical day is getting up, having a 9:30 morning meeting with the entire newsroom where we talk about what the biggest stories are, how we want to cover them, how we think we can contribute to them. And then everybody breaks into their different teams to talk about how they're going to do their stories, whether it's a written article or video and original reporting and interviewing that way. And then the rest of the days, it's kind of a cycle of editing, giving feedback to other people, doing reporting and interviewing myself, attending a number of meetings on any given day about different products that we're launching. We have a new newsletter, relatively new now, a daily newsletter that we're doing, for example, which has been an exciting product for us. So it really changes day to day, but it is a mix based on what's going on in the world.
So from beginning to end, when you sort of conceive of a story to when it goes out to the world, how long does that normally take?
That it varies. I think most people know now this for our kind of shorter form video, so 3 minutes and less. Those videos, for the most part, take just a couple of hours. Producers can make those in a couple of hours. Again, if it's a major original interview like Obama, we put the whole 22-minute interview out there, and that can take a day, multiple days longer, depending on what is needed for editing and graphics. But for the social clips that we put out, we put those out as quickly as we can, almost immediately.
Interesting. All right. Let's see. Do you think the shift to social video journalism has exacerbated or ameliorated sexism in media coverage? Ooh, interesting question.
Very interesting question. I don't know if I could make a definitive pronouncement on that. I mean, I don't think it's been a net negative effect. I think it's been a net positive. I think for all of the flaws of social video and social media, it has democratized the internet, and it allows a lot of people to have a seat at the table who don't normally have one. People can go viral for passionate speeches or interesting messages or a very creative music video, whatever it might be. So I think that's the upside of social video and social media, is that people who don't normally have a platform are able to have one and can organically grow an audience. Now, I will say I get a lot of hate and harassment. A lot of women on the internet do. There's no getting around that. There's no getting around the trolls. We've all pressured social media platforms to do better and enforce better policies against targeted harassment. So that continues to absolutely be an issue, but I don't think that should be a reason why, women should feel silenced or feel scared to speak up in that way.
How do you handle that when you get aggressive tweets, or what, I don't know how to put that, when you get trolled, how do you handle that emotionally?
Emotionally is one thing. I mean, how I handle it, generally speaking, is I ignore it. I do not respond to trolls. If it is a particularly graphic, profane, or actual violent threat, I absolutely report them and will follow through on the platforms to that. Emotionally, well, I highly recommend therapy. I go every week. It's not just for that. I think everybody should go to therapy for all of the reasons. But it really does take an emotional toll. And we've started to have a broader discussion about that in the industry, but it's taken us a really long time to get here. I mean, like, Twitter finally made changes to its hate speech policy last year after years and years of women complaining to them. And it's still not even enforced consistently. So I think I also try to channel my frustration with that into action and into forcing platforms to have better policies for this.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing, Clay Shirky writes about this in one of his books, the shift from sort of one to many communication. to many communication means that, you know, I mean, we see this with the Me Too movement, right? So a woman comes forward and then 10, 20, 30 other women come forward, and that's not something that you necessarily would have had, right? You would have had some of the, you know, these news stories sort of drift away before others could have come forward to corroborate. On the other hand, you invite, when you send that message out, you invite everybody to comment.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting sort of new medium to be thinking about.
It is. And Twitter recently introduced a new feature where you can also control now who replies to your tweets, or if you want anybody to reply whatsoever. So I have increasingly seen women and women of color use that if they're tweeting or covering something that they know is just going to, you know, engender hateful responses, then they'll use that. So these platforms also rolling out these new features and experimenting with them is also interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. So what I do to manage that is I only follow Star Trek people on Twitter. So all my tweets are about Star Trek. It's great. It's a good strategy. So we have a question here. It's a pretty intense question. How can our education system do better for criminal justice and economic justice for all minorities? So we have a question about education.
So with education, well, first of all, liberal arts is a great, liberal arts institutions are a great place to learn about all of this. But I think with education and understanding how we get to justice, a key part of that is really understanding our history. And we have such a long way to go in teaching accurate history in American schools. The 1619 Project, right, has become this huge point of national discussion. It's a great, I think, starting point for people to really understand the history of slavery in this country and how it has affected us to this day. And then unfortunately, it's also engendered this whole controversy among conservative politicians and in conservative media who are pushing back against allowing that to be taught in schools, even though it is real American history. And I'm gonna shout out my husband who put in a question earlier. His name is Casey Michelle. He's also a journalist, and he wrote a great piece. I'm biased, but I think it's a great piece about President Grant in Politico magazine earlier this week. And the piece is about what Biden can potentially learn from Grant about how to respond to domestic terrorism. And in this piece, and through Casey, he actually writes a lot about Louisiana history. And I didn't know about something called the Colfax Massacre that happened in Colfax, which is 30 minutes from where I grew up. And it was an incident in the late 1800s, excuse me, where white militiamen killed, I think 100 or more Black men. It was a massacre. I grew up in central Louisiana. I was never taught about this. I never knew about this until my partner from the Pacific Northwest who studies this told me about it. And so I really think we have such a long way to go in teaching the real history of even just where we live in schools. And that's, you know, that's primary through college. Absolutely. And I think that will help us get to actual justice one day.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And sort of developing the strategies for talking about these things. Yeah. Which can be incredibly difficult. Everyone gets emotional, and you know, there's so much concern about saying the wrong thing. There was a question from Maddie Madison talking about that, you know, that you can sometimes, as a professor, and I imagine as a reporter, I think especially as a comedian, you know, you might feel like you really have to walk a fine line. I've been very fortunate. I try to sort of begin every class where we might get into some of these conversations talking about how I would like to create a democratic space. I don't have all the answers. I don't have even I'm not even the person with the experiences that are the most relevant. Mm-hmm. For instance, when we're talking about racial justice, oftentimes students have more important experiences and understanding and to share. And so the liberal arts certainly provides a really important context for that kind of, to have those kinds of conversations, to move us forward in just our sort of wisdom and compassion around some of these issues.
Yeah.
So, but no, I did not know about this Colfax massacre. I'm going to have to learn more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. And like I said, I didn't know much about it either. And I think I completely agree with you. Centenary is a great place for this. And I think this is a cornerstone of liberal arts education. I don't know why I keep stumbling over that phrase. It's just critical thinking. And that's where Kim Van Hoosier Carey, as a professor, I remember really learning critical thinking skills in her class. Dr. Rodney Grunez in political science, like absolutely when reviewing, court cases, Supreme Court cases, whatever it might have been, just having that more critical lens on it is essential to really learning and growing.
Absolutely. Are there any more questions from the chat here? Let's see. If you had the time to go back to school, what class would you take?
Ooh, good question.
All of them is my answer.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm trying to think of what was offered that I maybe wasn't able to take. I do wish, speaking of teaching history better or improving on it, I do wish that we had more of a variety in the history classes that were offered at Centenary in the time that I was there. I think that would have been nice. And I don't think we had any non-white history professors. So that's also, part of the issue, part of the systemic issue. I don't know. Yeah, I think I would like to take more history classes and more varied history classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and diversity in higher education is something that's really on the move these days. There's a lot of excitement around projects of decolonizing syllabi, which is part of that sort of offering real histories and bringing more diverse voices into the conversation. So there's some work to be done, but there's also some really great work that's starting to happen. I think we are out of questions. I have a couple of my own, if you don't mind. First of all, can we circle back to this issue of imposter syndrome, especially for women and women of color? I think that's such an important thing to point out. I think that a lot of women hold themselves back from leadership opportunities because of that. What are some strategies for coping with that, for getting yourself through or around that?
I think, first of all, just knowing that you're not alone and knowing that everybody experiences some degree of this. And of course, women and women of color especially experience it a lot more. Knowing that you're not alone, and then also building out a network and then using a network of support is just so critically important. I was lucky enough to be selected for a women's leadership journalism program a couple of years ago. And it was me and 24 other women. And these are high-ranking women in news who have done amazing things in their career. And I was shocked that in this group of 25 accomplished women, we all had imposter syndrome. Some of us were even intimidated by each other, which felt ridiculous once we got to really know each other. But that network has become completely essential for me when I'm dealing with imposter syndrome, doubts, insecurity, when I'm dealing with real issues at work. And I need that support. They're some of the first people that I go to, that I tap into. I'm lucky enough to have a number of support networks and a very supportive family and friend circle as well. And James King, Amanda Russell, some of my best friends in the world that I met at Centenary, and I still talk to them almost every day. So I think really building, having, and activating a network for support for combating imposter syndrome, knowing that you're not alone, doing your research, because honestly, if you've done your research or done your homework for whatever you're about to try to achieve or go for, then nobody can really take that away from you. And you can have a lot of confidence in knowing that you've done everything that you can to prepare for this opportunity. A favorite quote that I have from Michelle Obama, she talks about how she's been in the room with, the richest, most successful people in the world. And she says, they are not that smart. Like, she wrote about this in her memoir, Becoming, which is great. She says, they're not that smart. People feel intimidated by these incredibly successful people that our society holds up and puts on a pedestal, but they're not necessarily any smarter than you or I are. It's just knowing and having the confidence to first get yourself in that room, and then having the confidence to speak up when you are in that room. And I think that's also an important reminder, is that we tend to put a lot of people on pedestals who don't deserve to be there. And the US, especially in very, pro-capitalist societies, it's wealthy and rich people who we assume are automatically smart because they are rich or wealthy. We're starting to have that conversation now about inherited wealth, generational wealth, how this happens. And it's not necessarily that everybody is a successful, brilliant entrepreneur, but just remembering that they're human. And as Michelle Obama says, they are not that smart.
That is incredible advice, and I especially appreciate this idea that connection can overcome, because a lot of times imposter syndrome comes from isolation, from not having anyone to talk to who is going through what you're going through or who has gone through what you're going through. And if you just have a chance to talk to someone and get that reality check, right? These voices in your head are not what's real. Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. I hope we can extract that little clip and play it on a loop on Centenary's website. Well, I think we are about at the end of our time. I don't see any more questions, so this would be a good time to bring things to a close. Do you have some parting words for us?
No, I think I saw a question earlier about what was my favorite book that we read in your sci-fi class.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I wanted to answer that one. It was you introduced me to Octavia Butler, and I absolutely love her work. Got it right there. See, that's perfect. That's perfect. She's fantastic. Her writing is fantastic, and I loved that. And yeah, 14 years later, I haven't forgotten about it. So it was great.
Oh, she's fantastic. I'm so glad. That makes me so happy. I'm actually teaching her right now.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, it's a perfect way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us and for doing that amazing interview with Josh. You clearly have a talent for doing interviews. I also want to thank Josh for giving us his time. I want to thank the Centenary's Convocation Committee members, especially Kate Pedrotti for helping set this up, and Chris Brown for helping us practice with technical support. Especially want to thank the Attaway family for supporting events such as these through the Centenary's Attaway professorships in civic culture. And I want to thank everyone for attending and participating and having such a rigorous conversation in the chat. So students, tune in on February 11th for the annual Gender and Sexuality Forum, which will be held via webinar from 6:30 to 7:30, and watch your email and campus announcements for other events. Versha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This was really great. And I really enjoyed your classes and your work. So I love that you got to interview me as well at the end of this. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you everyone for the amazing comments and questions. There are some really great ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.